I have 4:30, so I will call this meeting of the Camarillo City Council to order and ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Kildee.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes. Councilmember Santangelo.
Here.
Councilmember Tremblay.
Here.
Vice Mayor Malche.
Present.
Mayor Craven.
Here. We're meeting at 4:30 for the purpose of a closed session. Are there any members of the public who have comments on the closed session item? We'll have regular comments at a later time. I see no hands up. So I will ask the city attorney to please announce the circumstances under which we will go into closed session.
Yes, I can do that. This will be a conference with legal counsel, anticipated litigation, initiation of litigation pursuant to Government Code Section 54956.9 D4. Number of potential cases is 1.
Okay. At this point, we will recess to a closed session, and we plan to be back at 5 o'clock.
Madam Mayor,
Yes,
Charlotte, I was going to go ahead and call the sanitary district meeting to order at 5,
right,
thereafter followed by council, okay?
right.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, it's now 5 o'clock. I'm going to go ahead and call this meeting to order, regular meeting to order of the Camarillo Sanitary District for April 14, 2021. Let the record reflect that all directors of the district are present. Mr. Kildee, would you mind leading us in the flag salute?
Certainly. Put your hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Kildee. Let's see, are there any amendments to the agenda?
No amendments.
All right, Madam Clerk, I don't see any public comments at this point.
I would just ask if anybody had comments to raise their hand, but this is for sanitary district only.
I understand. Are there any members of the public who wish to comment on sanitary district matters? All right, seeing none, we have a consent calendar. Do I hear a motion on consent calendar?
Move the approval.
I'll second the motion.
All right, we have a motion by Mayor Craven, a second by Director Kildee. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Craven,
Yes,
Director Kildee,
Yes.
Director Mulchay,
Yes.
Secretary Santangelo,
Yes.
Chair Tremblay.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Do we have any comments from staff? Hearing none, do we have any comments from directors? All right, hearing none, I'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting of the Sanitary District Board of Directors.
I'll call a meeting of the Camarillo City Council back to order and ask the record reflect that all council members are present. Are there any amendments to this agenda?
Mayor Craven,
Yes,
staff would like to remove item J from the agenda.
okay. Item J is simply being removed from the agenda. It is on the consent calendar. Are there any other requests for amendments to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll go on to the consent calendar, and that's with
Madam Mayor, I'm sorry. I have a question on item L. It's just a question on item L on the consent calendar.
a question that might take a while, or,
No, it's be a very simple question.
okay, go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, did we get bids when we went out for this from some local companies?
Hi, to answer that question, we used CompuVision and we did not go out to bid. We based that off of a contract that was competitively bid, and we piggybacked on that. This is a company that we have used before, and we did get one other local bid just to kind of test to see if they were in line in their pricing, which they were.
So we are familiar with their work.
Yes,
And the bid is comparable.
correct.
Thank you.
Okay, do we have a motion?
I'll move the approval.
I'll second.
Second? There's a motion and a second to approve the consent calendar. Could we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Kildee,
Yes.
Councilmember Santangelo,
Yes.
Councilmember Tremblay,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Molche,
Yes.
Mayor Craven.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
Okay, the first discussion item is the reopening of the Camarillo Public Library. Could we have the staff report, please?
Yes, Your Honor and members of the City Council, my name is John Thomas, Interim Director of Administrative Services, and I'll be presenting this item. I'll be bringing up a PowerPoint just momentarily. So it's very exciting to be able to bring tonight an item that reopens the Camarillo Public Library with modifications. This is, as you recall, it's to the day tonight, 1 year and 1 month that the Camarillo Public Library was closed to walk-in traffic and to the public due to the spread of COVID-19. As the closure continued, we evaluated various services that would be able to be provided during its closure. We implemented curbside services, which have been very popular with the community. We also continued in a virtual way the adult literacy and RFBC services. And that was the extent to our services until now, as we review a plan that we feel we can do safely because of recent and significant decreases to the number of COVID cases, as well as a very successful vaccine rollout throughout the state and even our local county and local areas. This has allowed many businesses to consider reopening and to reopen, and also to provide just a greater extent of services. Staff is anticipating this reopening as we saw the numbers fall in our area, and we worked closely with our library operator, LS&S, on a modified reopening plan. And it was one that we wanted, first and foremost, to handle the health and safety for both staff and the public. It's very important to us that their safety. It also outlines a reopening with modifications. And so it's not full reopening as we had experienced before the COVID pandemic, but it is a reopening with modifications to hours of operation, with the curbside service, with capacity, access to materials, the use of technology, the virtual services that are provided, distancing, and cleaning protocols. So I'd like to go into some of those areas in a little more detail. The plan outlines that beginning Tuesday, April 27th, the library would open to walk-in traffic. The hours would be the same as they are currently for curbside, which is Tuesday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. Curbside services would continue on Tuesday through Saturday, and they would be during the hours of 10 a.m. to 12 p.m. and then 3 p.m. to 5 p.m. And those time slots represent the peak use times for that service. Staff has been monitoring that service quite closely and have determined that those are the hours of peak use. As far as capacity, we are in the orange tier, and under retail guidelines in orange tier, there are no specific percentage capacity limitations. So we can reopen as long and have incoming traffic, and we are just monitoring that we can maintain the physical distancing that is required. Visitors will be able to browse and check out the physical materials, be able to browse the book stacks and all the various areas of the library. Library staff will be creating pre-selected book bundles. So this would be books of similar topics or maybe similar authors or whatnot that will allow for the quick picking up of books of a certain topic and then checking out. It's really kind of to help speed a visitor's time there so that it's just one that could be a quick in and a quick out. Quarantine for handled return materials is set at 48 hours. This is something that is common among many libraries, and each library has formed their own time frame for that quarantine. At this point, we're at a 48-hour quarantine for handled materials. Use of technology will cover the use of computers. We will have a limited number of computers because the carols can't support, not every carol can have an individual sitting at it and still maintain that proper distancing. So we'll be limited there. And because of that, we're also imposing a 1 hour per user per day limitation, just so that with the limited use of computers, we can cause that turnover so everybody has a chance to have access. Also, there will be printers, copiers, and Wi-Fi access available. Visitors can use their own personal devices to access the internet and web resources. Virtual services will continue for the RFBC and the Literacy Center. And also there will be an addition of a summer reading program that once staff has returned, they'll be working on, and then it'll be set to be implemented in the mid-June, right when summer starts, for students, just to continue their reading skills. And like many other businesses now that we've become familiar with in terms of restrictions when we enter, we will be having the same similar safety and distancing protocols as well. So wearing of face coverings will be required, masks as well. The requirement of physical distancing, the use of plexiglass where person-to-person interaction is likely to occur. Also, there will be a rearrangement of furniture just to help again with that distancing. So there won't be the same number of tables or maybe the number of chairs. Things will be spread out. I also want to highlight that in this plan, there is no in-person library programming or events. There's no public use of study rooms, homework center, or the conference rooms. No public reservations of the facility. Cleaning protocols, there will be a daytime custodian that will be there throughout the day and will be in a continual mode of wiping down commonly touched surfaces, doorknobs, handrails, surfaces such as that. The computers and equipment will be wiped down after each use. Hand sanitizers will also be located throughout the facility for the public and for staff. Custodial services will continue, the normal nightly service, and also the public restrooms will be available. I would also like to just provide some updates. The Friends of the Camarillo Library, I've been in weekly communication with them. They do have similar plans to open. Right now, they do hope to open the same week as the 27th with the library. They are looking at maybe a limited opening where maybe it's 3 days a week. Right now, they're canvassing their volunteers to formulate a schedule, and so that the actual times and hours are still pending. But we are in communication with them on that, and they do wish to open. Similarly, the Library Cafe, we have been in communication with the operator, and the good news is that the operator is interested in reopening, but due to just the nature of that operation, it really lends itself to the foot traffic of not only the high school and the library and also the Friends of the Library bookstore. And so the operator will be gauging that amount of foot traffic, and hopefully we'll see an opening for the cafe maybe late June or in July. Then finally, the library director recruitment has been continuing on, and they do have a final candidate that an offer and an acceptance has been made, and we expect to see the new director on site at the library in May. And I do look forward to introducing her at the next Camarillo Library Board meeting on May 26th. That moves us to the suggested action, which comes because the library operation budget was reduced at the mid-year review to reflect the information that we had currently at that time. And now that we see that we can reopen and reopen safely, we would be looking to increase our operations and our service levels. And so we would need a $350,000 of that budget reduction reinstated. And I would like to note that this does not exceed the original contract amount. And with that, that concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to answer any questions.
Any questions? I'm not seeing every hand go up. Let me ask mine. It says that we're going to require a 6 foot physical distance. That's for people not in a family. So if a mother and a little kid is looking at a book or looking for books, they're okay?
That is true. That would be among households.
Thank you. Mr. Kildee?
Thank you. Are all of the, I'll call them protocols, the same throughout the library?
And you, as far as in each area?
Yes, with the, the children's and young and the general.
Yes. So the library staff will be enforcing it uniformly throughout the library. And there will be an understanding that if there's a parent with a child and they are, together and close with one another, that's okay. However, if they see a number of young adults, for example, huddled together, there may be some interaction there. But those are things where the library staff will be policing the situation and monitoring how things are going. And I would also say that certainly there can be adjustments made as we learn from just enacting this plan. This is something we haven't really done before, so we're learning too. But the library staff has really have it under control.
Any other questions? Let me ask if there's any member of the public who has a question. If so, please raise your hand. I see no questions from the public. What are the wishes of the council?
I have a comment if I may.
Certainly, Mr. Kildee.
To me, this is really good news. I know we've all been waiting quite a while for this. So I fully support this, and I really look forward to this reopening of this outstanding asset.
Comments or motions, Ms. Santangelo?
I'll move the suggested action.
Second.
There's a motion and a second for an appropriation of $350,000 to the general fund. Library operations account 101-4684-468-35-98. Could we have the recall? Could we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Kildee,
Yes.
Councilmember Santangelo,
Yes.
Councilmember Tremblay,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Molche,
Yes.
Mayor Craven.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimous.
Okay, next item is graduating senior banner recognition. Could we have their staff report on that, please?
Good evening, Mayor Craven and council members. I'm Michelle Deanna, Community Relations Officer. The issue before you this evening is a request for banners to be inserted into the city banner program in Old Town Camarillo. The banner program is currently managed by the Public Works Department, who contracts with a vendor to rotate city-owned banners on a seasonal schedule. The genesis of this request for a one-time pivot to the city's banner program is the acknowledgement that the COVID-19 pandemic has impacted all traditional activities for graduating high school seniors this year. The Oxnard Union High School District has no set plans yet for graduation ceremonies, and they don't anticipate to have a plan in place until the end of April. Parent representatives have requested the city's permission to recognize the class of 2021's graduating seniors by hanging banners from the city-owned streetlights in the public right-of-way within Camarillo's Old Town. The concept was presented to the Economic Development and Land Use Committee on March 31st, and the committee supported the concept. Recognizing that these are city-owned streetlights and that the banners will be hung in the public right-of-way, the installation and removal of these banners needs to be done by the city. This will trigger prevailing wage requirements because public funds would be used to pay the banner contractor. Based on the amount of streetlights and the criteria for these senior banners that have been described to staff by the parent representatives, staff determined that the installation and removal of the banners is estimated to cost approximately $11,250, not including any potential maintenance expenses that could arise. The Economic Development and Land Use Committee recommended that city staff bring this item to the City Council for your consideration, with a recommendation that the city pay for the installation and removal of the banners. This expense would be for a public purpose namely to honor Camarillo residents who are graduating from high school during these COVID-restricted times. The cost for the banners and all associated equipment that would be required for hanging the banners will be covered by the parent representatives, and they plan to fundraise and seek sponsorships from the community. So staff is presenting this item to you this evening for your discussion and consideration of the committee's recommendation. And if your council would like to move forward with the committee's recommendation, staff is requesting your council to authorize the city manager to execute a professional services agreement with the Flag Factory, doing business as Main Street Banner USA, who's the city's contracted banner vendor, for the installation and removal of banners on city-owned streetlights to recognize class of 2021 graduating seniors for a total authorized amount for expenses not to exceed $15,000 for fiscal year 2021. This concludes staff presentation, and we're certainly available for any questions that you may have. Thank you.
Are there any questions? Susan.
I have quite a few, actually. First of all, is there any cost to the students?
Well, there will be a cost to the banners. This is what we understand from the parent representatives. There will obviously be a cost for the banners, and they're planning on opening that up to parents, and they're looking for also for sponsorships from the local business community for anybody who would want to contribute. This would not be a city-run program. This is actually a program that's being run by parent representatives.
Right.
And so they would be the ones coordinating all of that.
Right. So, and I understand that that it's not a city-run program. But my concern is if there is a cost to the students individually, what happens to the students who can't afford to pay for that, and would that exclude anybody? Along the lines of exclusion is, how is the group ensuring that every graduating youth from Camarillo will be included? You know, there are a lot of kids that aren't in traditional schools or have chosen to continue to do distance learning. So where is or who is accountable then for making sure that we haven't left anybody out?
That's a really good question. And it would probably be better suited to direct that to Christina Chastain or Karina Kalberg, who are the parent representatives that we've been speaking with. Anecdotally, we have asked those questions, and we are aware that there are people who would be interested in sponsoring those students who would otherwise not necessarily be able to afford the program.
Christina is tuned in and she has her hand up. Perhaps she could answer the question.
Great.
Good evening, everyone. Yes.
Hi.
So we have a few things in place. We definitely have the same concern as you, Councilmember Santangelo. We don't want anybody to be left out. And so we have started our plan of action, and in that we have sought out parent representatives from each school, including those that are homeschooled. We even have parent representatives from those private schools that are not here in Camarillo, because we would like to make sure that all of the students that live here in the city of Camarillo that are graduating this year are recognized. We also have already received one donation of $1,200 from a member of our community. And we expect that we have others that have already said they want to sponsor. I don't believe that we're going to have any problem covering the cost for those students that may not be able to afford it. The only thing that we don't have any control over is whether or not the student has taken their senior picture. So we would have to send out, as soon as if we have approval, then we can send out a notice to through the schools to all the students in offering. There were also sponsorships to offer that those students can go and take a senior picture so that they could be included.
Yeah, I'm glad you met. That was my other question was, you know, if it's the way it was last year, the sitting is free, but in order to be able to use any of those images, it's pretty expensive. So I didn't know how that was being coordinated.
Monarch Photography has donated the pictures for our use. The same with Sinorama is also going to give us their cost for the banners and be printed. So they're working collaboratively to make sure that all of these students are represented in these banners.
Great. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Malche, did you have questions?
Yeah, it was more of just a point of clarification, and that this is going to be directed to Michelle. What we're deciding on is an authorization up to a certain dollar figure, but that is a variable based on the number of banners that ultimately are placed. Is that right?
We're basing that on the number of banners and number of streetlights that we understand from the parent representatives would be needed in order to support this program.
Okay, all right. So they're confident of hitting that number.
Yes.
Okay.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Tremblay?
I've got two questions. Just to clarify, could somebody tell me what about a senior who lives in Camarillo who attends Newberry Park High School or a private high school? Can you clarify for me that they would be included in this?
Ms. Chastain, could you answer that?
Yes, and yes, they would be included. Any student that lives in the city of Camarillo, regardless of what school they go to, will be included.
Okay, and the second question is a more difficult question. That is, what happens if the parent representatives don't raise all the money that's necessary to fund the program?
Well, I feel very confident that we will be able to raise the funds. We are also being backed by the Camarillo Old Town Association, and that you know, many of our business members, I'm also the president of that association. Many of our business members have already said that they would be sponsors to this program, and we've been talking about it on social media and various groups between the moms of Camarillo and the class of 2021, and we have a unanimous support on this. So I don't, and even those that parents are saying, if you know, that they themselves would cover more than just their child. So I think that our community really wants to come around these students, and I don't see that we're not. I believe that we'll make that mark.
Right, I wasn't asking because I think the intent is great. I'm just trying to figure out pragmatically what happens if that goal is not reached, but yet if the council were to commit the funds, what would happen then? That's what I'm trying to figure out. But I guess what I'm walking away with is a representation that you're confident that the parent group will reach that fundraising goal.
Correct.
I don't have any further questions. Thanks, Madam Mayor.
Any other questions? Mr. Kildee, you're muted.
Yeah, thank you. I have a couple of questions. So the pictures, how will, I know the answer, but I think for the public, how are they going to be honored if in fact we go forward with this, with the banners, names, pictures, how will they be identified?
Okay, so at this point, just speaking with Sinorama yesterday, we wanted to put their names and their school, but it would just be too much time to put into it, very tedious work to try to identify 800 students and get the names right for everybody. And rather than have the possibility of an error, we decided that what we would do is we would group the schools together. So for instance, Camarillo High School would be notated at that top, ACHS class of 2021, with their color, and so on and so forth for each, you know, Rancho Campana, Rio Mesa, and then those students that are, if we don't have enough of the other students that are outside of the area, you know, between all of the private schools and those that attend Newberry Park, then we would just have, you know, congratulations to the class of 2021. That's what we discussed yesterday. You know, as we go forward, we will, you know, get together, and we want to, you know, make the best representation for these students and to honor them. And the other idea that I had was not only from the beginning of Old Town on either side, I didn't want to start with pictures. I wanted to wait until you kind of get into the middle of the Old Town area, so that we would have maybe some banners kind of like welcoming people to honor these students. Congratulations to the class of 2021. Thank you to our sponsors. Maybe leading into where the students' pictures would start to be revealed. So we're still in the planning of this, but definitely have some really good ideas as to how we're going to make sure that these students are represented and honored.
I have a follow-up, if I may. If there's an
Certainly.
individual and a company, let's say, out there that would like to make a donation, how would they do that?
They would send their donation to the Camarillo Old Town Association, and we have an account that our accountant has set aside an account to put all of the donations into, so that we could pay for anything that we need to pay for. So we'll be collecting the money and paying for the banners out of the Camarillo Old Town Association account.
Will you get the appropriate address at the appropriate time of where to send that, and or online, or?
Yes.
Mr. Mulchay, did you have another question?
I did. One last follow-up. This is from Mrs. Chastain. Do you anticipate, is this going to be an opt-in or an opt-out program? Because I assume that some parents, for whatever reason, probably maybe they don't want their kid's name or picture on a banner. How do you anticipate that to work? Is it going to be an opt-in?
Yes, they would have to sign a photo release for us to use their student's picture.
Okay.
That's how we anticipated keeping track of those students that will opt in, and whether or not they can pay we're anticipating $20 per student. So yeah.
Okay, so the important thing is everyone will be given the opportunity to opt in. Obviously, some people would choose not to.
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
If no one else has questions, I still have a couple. You mentioned 3 high schools in town, but we have Frontier as well. You have a parent from Frontier on your group?
Yes, Frontier, Ace Charter, Vista Real. Yeah, those are also included.
Okay, thank you. And what about, you said anybody who lives in Camarillo and goes to these schools? What about students who go to Camarillo High School especially and don't live in Camarillo, live in the Heights, live in Somas, live in the Santa Rosa Valley?
If they attend school in Camarillo, we've talked about this as well, because we have had some parents reach out to us already regarding these questions. And we thought it would be fair that if their student attends school in Camarillo, that they would also be included.
Okay, very good. That's all the questions I have. Does anybody else have a question? Okay, I think we've asked every question that could be asked. Okay, I'll put it out to the council. Let me ask if there are any members of the public who have comments on this. If any member of the public has a comment, please raise your hand now. I see no hands up, so it goes back to the council now for discussion or a motion. Mr. Mulchay.
Just a very brief comment. I do want to thank Mr. Councilmember Kildee. You were the one who originally brought this to council and kind of get the ball rolling on our side. I know there are probably parents involved, likely Mrs. Chastain herself. I do want to thank Mrs. Chastain too for really stepping up and taking point on this. It's going to take a few dedicated parents, and I know you're one of them, and I appreciate you and the others who are involved. I am very supportive of this. Obviously, I was in the subcommittee, which Mr. Kildee and I recommended this out of. I think it's very befitting, and I think it's kind of the definition of community. I think it's a very small sum of money, all things considered. It's not $45,000. It's no more than $15,000. And in light of the fact that we didn't do community grants this fiscal year, I think it's fitting. So.
Ms. Santangelo.
I think this is The intent, as Mr. Tremblay said, is there to do great. I think this is a noble endeavor. I think it is a time to celebrate the accomplishments of these kids during a time when it's been tough. However, I also, there's something not sitting right with me. You know, last year, I know personally what these kids are going through, what they've missed out on. Last year, I had a senior in high school who's essentially his last day of school was in February, and he spent the rest of his senior year at home. And there was no prom, no grad night, didn't even see his friends because during that time, the lockdown was even tighter. And there was nothing for them. So I experienced it with him. And so I get it that these kids have missed out. I get it. We didn't do anything for any of those kids last year. And that doesn't mean that we should continue doing nothing. So it's not like I'm trying to compare the years, but there are some people that will. I'm still really concerned that someone's going to get left out. This has nothing to do with intention. I think everybody's going to, I know some of the people doing this, and it's not about intention. I'm just concerned that people will be left out. Frankly, I would love to see this money go to scholarships. I would give twice as much money for scholarships. You know, so I'm lukewarm here. I'm interested to hear other comments. It's not that I don't support this. I don't know really how to explain it. I don't want people to think I'm a buzzkill or I don't care about our kids. I really do. I really do. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks.
Mr. Kildee.
Yeah, Ms. Santangelo, you're not a buzzkill. You bring up some very important questions. Obviously, in a perfect world, it would have been great to do something last year, which we were in the real throes of where do we go from here. We had some pretty heavy duty discussions, and actually Mr. Mulchay brought up some really good points on this too. You know, the thought is the heavy lifting's actually going with Ms. Sustain and her group here. It's pretty simple with me. Is obviously I'm concerned, of course, that if somebody does get left out, that obviously is not a good thing. But the thought here, from my point of view, we're just trying to do something that we thought would be a really good thing for this year's graduating seniors. And it's kind of been evolving too. I mean, there was, Ms. Sustain had said earlier how many schools, and I know Mr. Tremblay and yourself and Mr. Mulchay and Mayor Craven have brought up some very good points here. I was pleased that most, if not all of them, have been addressed. The $15,000 is not, it's $15,000, and obviously it could go to scholarships, but we thought in this day and age, just coming out of a horrible time, that the graduating seniors, you know, it would be a really good thing to acknowledge them one way or the other. And we did have a letter from a constituent that basically said, you know, hey, maybe we should spend money on homeless and things of that nature. And that would be a great thing to do, but we had to kind of decide from a great pool here and kind of narrow it down to what we thought we could do within the relatively limited amount of time that we have to do this. So that was the thought from my perspective with the committee and dealing with the volunteers on that. I do support this. I have a lot of faith that we can do this, do it well. I'm not going to pontificate and say that we're not going to leave somebody out. We very may well. It would not be our intention to do that. But this is going to be a relatively large program that's never been done in the city before. But my thoughts are we have to start somewhere. And I believe that this would be a good place to start. So those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, my thoughts are that I think we need to do this. All I can say about last year is we were looking so much at how much money we thought we were not going to have. We cut so many things in the city. We weren't thinking of spending additional money. But in addition to that, nobody came and asked us. This is not a city initiated project. We're responding to a request from a person whom I'm assuming has a child who goes to one of these high schools or is homeschooled, but will be graduating this year. I don't know Ms. Chastain, but I'm making that assumption. And I'm assuming that all the other parents on this committee have children who will be graduating from one place or another this year. So I congratulate them for taking the bull by the horn, so to speak, and coming and asking us, and also for making arrangements to collect as much money as they hope to collect. I would like to answer the person who wrote to us, Mr. Diamond, suggesting that we use the funds instead to give money to Food Share, Habitat for Humanity, Meals on Wheels, and Casa Pacifica. And I want to point out that every year we have been giving money to Habitat for Humanity for the rehabilitation of homes here in Camarillo. That comes out of our CDBG funds. And we also, last year, and I'm hoping this coming year, will be giving, or the current year, and I'm hoping the following budget year, will be giving money to the healthcare district for its home meal delivery service. So we're covering two of the things that he asked for. And I, as I said, it's a very small, well, it is a very small amount of money. As far as children who might be left off accidentally, I don't believe anybody will be left off intentionally. You know, sometimes you got to have a hardship in order to learn deep down how to react to a hardship. And this might be a way for that child. Everybody has hardships of one type or another. And there are a whole lot worse things than not having your name on one banner that people will drive by 3 or 4 times during the course of the 6 weeks or 2 months or whatever they're going to be up. So that part doesn't concern me. There are a lot of stories about people who used to be left out of telephone books. I can remember one time Dr. Cartman was omitted from the telephone book and had a real problem that year because his customers or his patients couldn't find his phone number when they wanted to make an appointment. And some of them did go to other doctors. So there are a lot worse things than that. I just think this is something that will be nice and it is a reasonable cost. So Mr. Tremblay.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I had my hand raised earlier. I wanted to respond to that email that we had received, but I want to make sure that we did discuss that, and I wanted to address it. And the gist of the email from the resident was that the funds, you know, we ought to donate funds in the name of the graduating seniors, and it would serve a better purpose to send those funds to organizations like Food Share and Habitat for Humanity, et cetera. And I guess my perspective is somewhat different than that. First of all, I think this program is coming from a good intent. I'm concerned about kids being left off. It is an opt-in program, if I understand it correctly. So I think we have to rely on the good faith of the folks who are spearheading, including Ms. Chastain and her volunteers, and I really salute them for wanting to do this. I look at this as a one-time general fund expenditure in recognition of these seniors, and the high school seniors in a lot of ways have been very hard hit. And they were hard hit last year too. I just can't get around it, but they've been a hard hit portion of our city's population. I think the city has spent a significant amount of money assisting businesses and assisting nonprofits. And I'm thinking of the healthcare district. I'm thinking with CDBG funds, what we've been doing for other nonprofits to assist the homeless, to assist folks who need meals, et cetera. To me, I don't think it's an unreasonable morale booster to spend this general fund money, given the truly awful, just terrible circumstances of the last 12 months. I think the circumstances are extenuating. That said, I just want to reiterate, I'll support this, but it's one time only, because at a general fund, because I think we're going to be in a, hopefully, I'm looking for wood to knock on, we're going to be in a significantly different position next year. So I'll again, kudos to Ms. Chastain and the volunteers who are trying to put this together. So I'll support it this one time with general fund monies. Thanks.
Is there a motion?
I'll make that motion on the suggested action under the staff report.
I'll second.
Motion and a second. Could we have a staff report, please? Could we have, I'm sorry. I'm calling for a different thing at every time we want to vote. Could we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Kildee.
Yes.
Councilmember Santangelo.
Yes.
Councilmember Tremblay.
Yes.
Vice Mayor Molche.
Yes.
Mayor Craven.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously. Mayor Craven, as you know, the next item is a joint item with the Planning Commission, and I would ask if we could just take a brief pause so that we can promote them all as panelists, and also they need to call themselves to order. So we'll hold on just a moment.
Okay.
It looks like we have everybody there.
Would the Planning Commission like to call itself to order?
Yes, Madam Mayor. I'm Gene Talmadge, Chair of the Planning Commission, and I would like to call the April 14th meeting of the Planning Commission, a joint meeting with the City Council. I would like to call the meeting to order. Mr. Secretary, could we have a roll call?
Yes, thank you. Commissioner Edsel,
Here.
Commissioner Vandermeulen,
Here.
Commissioner Espinosa,
Here.
Commissioner Murphy,
Here.
and Chair Talmadge,
Here.
all present.
Okay, and the City Council.
Question, do we dispense with the flag salute, or since one was already given for the City Council meeting, does that cover us?
I think that covers you.
Got it.
Because the next item on the agenda is the housing element update. So could we have the staff report, please?
Yes, thank you, Mayor Craven, members of the City Council and Planning Commission. We have joining us this evening our consultant from Rincon, Mr. Greg Martin, and then assisting is Veronica Tam from Veronica Tam and Associates. So at this point, I'll be turning it over to Greg Martin, our consultant, to provide a presentation to the City Council, Planning Commission, staff, and the public.
Thank you. I will share my screen now so you can see the PowerPoint My name is Greg Martin, as said, I'm with Rincon Consultants. And together with Veronica Tam and Associates, we're working on the housing element update for the city. And hopefully now you can see the title slide for this presentation. Camarillo Housing Element Update, Draft Goals, Policies, and Programs. Let me know if that's not the case.
It's working. Thank you, Greg.
Great, thank you. Okay, so background for this is that the state housing law mandates that all jurisdictions periodically update their housing elements, as I'm sure you know. The city's current housing element, covering the period 2013 to 2021, expires on October 15th of this year. That is also when the next housing element update needs to be adopted, October 15th of this year. This will be the cycle 6, so to speak, with the current one being cycle 5. And I'll cover the period 2021 to 2029, so an 8-year period. And I'll be going through these slides somewhat quickly, but of course, if you have any questions after, we can skip back to other slides. The following meetings and workshops have been held to communicate with the public and city decision makers and get their feedback regarding this project. On August 27th of last year, a public workshop was held to introduce the process and the proposed residential land inventory. And then in October 14th, 2020, a city council meeting with planning commission attending, as tonight, was held to introduce, again, the process and the proposed residential land inventory, and to provide an update on the public comments received at that first public workshop. On October 28th, 2020, a city council meeting was held to introduce and receive feedback on the initial draft housing element goals, policies, and programs. And then on February 11th of this year, 2021, the second public workshop was held to present revised draft goals and policies based on the previous meetings and workshops for initial feedback. And speaking of that second public workshop, we're going to step through some of the comments that were received at that workshop. Some were questions, some were requests, but we'll go through them now. There's more information on them, I believe, in more detail in your staff reports. One question was, are there any more affordable ownership units available in the Springville development area? And the answer is no, those are all occupied, but there are other affordable units in the city and really throughout the city in various different areas. Secondly, there's a request to amend program number 9, inclusionary housing programs, to require a certain percentage of affordable units in developments of a certain size. And staff does not recommend doing this because the city has sufficient land inventory sites to meet the city's regional housing needs assessment, or RHNA. And that will be demonstrated in the housing element, including the land inventory portion. We have sufficient sites for lower and moderate income units. Another comment was, request was the city should give more prominence to the housing policies by posting them on the city's website and including them as an appendix to the housing element. And staff recommends consideration of these requests in the future. Another request was to add a new program called Special Needs Housing Farm Worker Housing Study. And staff recommends, in line with this request, adding a program to work with the advocacy groups to do this housing study and survey to basically figure out farm worker housing needs, but not including funding or committing to developing programs and strategies to address the needs that are verified or found in this survey until the survey results are completed. Another request was to add a new program to support and contribute funding to develop affordable housing, to support and contribute at least $25,000 annually to the Housing Trust Fund of Ventura County. And staff does not recommend adding this program because of future budget uncertainties and because funding can be used outside of Camarillo, but the City Council can consider these requests even without a housing element program. Also, the existing housing element in proposed housing element program 5, nonprofit housing organizations, already states that the city will work with nonprofit housing organizations in various ways. Another question in the second public workshop was, how does SB 330 inhibit the 400 unit per year allotment under the city's residential development evaluation board development control ordinance? So the RDEB, under the RDEB, as I'm sure you know, developers must apply for development allotments before obtaining building permits, and the city only provides 400 allotments per year to ensure that the city has stable growth, does not overextend its infrastructure or strain services to the community. Currently, SB 330, state law applying to all cities, prevents the city from enforcing the development control ordinance until January 1st, 2025. That's the sunset date, so to speak, of that law. And that is during the period of this next housing element cycle. And so if it does end on that date as planned, as currently planned, then the city can go back to exercising this 400 unit per year allotment. Lastly, comment received outside of that public workshop, we received comment from Naval Base Ventura County suggesting that the city incorporate military compatibility programs for new residential sites in the city of Camarillo by integrating policy recommendations contained in the Navy's Joint Land Use Study and NVVC Point Mugu Air Installation Compatibility Use Zone Study. The city will continue to include the base in the review of proposed housing projects for consistency with these two studies. We would also like to report a little bit or describe a little bit the community survey that was done as part of the housing element. Staff developed an online community survey to provide another avenue for public comments on community housing needs. And the city received a total of 111 responses during the survey period, beginning on February 26, 2021 and ending on March 26, 2021. The completed community survey report with community input was attached to your agenda report and is also available online. So draft goals. The current housing element identifies 3 goals. Staff has reviewed these goals and believes they're all still relevant and still apply to the community. Staff is suggesting a minor revision to goal number 3 to link the goal to fair housing principles. And that you can see that at the end of goal 3 in the language, promote housing opportunities for all households. And again, I'm going to try to go through these somewhat quickly. If we want to go back later and revisit any slide or any goal or policy or program, we can do that. And similarly, staff has reviewed the city's existing housing element policies and believes that they are all still relevant and still apply. We'll pull those all up. And there is a change to policy 3 which is promote accessibility to housing opportunities by all households, regardless of, and then we list income, race, color, religion, et cetera. And then at the end, or any other classes protected by local, state, and federal fair housing laws. So we're just making sure we're covering all the bases there and tying it into state and federal fair housing laws. So current programs to carry forward. And I'll be going through these pretty quickly because they we are carrying them forward from the city's existing programs, but they include program 1, the density bonus and other incentives for affordable housing. And hopefully you're familiar with how that works, but it's to encourage new residential development to include affordable units in exchange for these density bonuses or other development incentives. And staff will ensure minimal difference between affordable and market rate units, adequate separation, physical separation between the units, and having affordable units included in all housing types provided by the development. And also the program also calls on the city to require affordable housing agreements. And then program 2 is the affordable housing bonus points under the residential development control system, which I already described. So basically going to continue that program. We did add language here pointing out that when SB 330 sunsets and the residential development control may apply during the second half of this housing element period. Program 3, allow accessory dwelling units, provide information to the public regarding them. Program 4, fair housing practices. And the city contracts with the Housing Rights Center to investigate discrimination complaints, fair housing violations, provide referral and counseling services to Camarillo residents, conduct fair housing public workshops, and provide staff with annual housing rights training. This program also calls on the city to comply with all state and federal fair housing laws. We did want to point out here that HCD is developing a technical memo regarding new requirements under AB 686, which relates to affirmatively furthering fair housing. But they have not done that yet, or not released it yet. So when more information is available, staff will most likely need to update this program to address these requirements. Program 5, nonprofit housing organizations, collaborate with the nonprofit organizations listed here to pursue development and preservation of affordable housing. Program 6, code compliance, basically keep carrying out the city's existing code compliance efforts. Program 7, affordable housing preservation program to preserve at-risk owner-occupied affordable units from converting to market rate. This corresponds to, or is done through implementing City Council Policy 7.12 and purchase at-risk units as they become available and resell the units with updated affordability covenants. Program 8, Housing Choice Vouchers Payment Standards, support the efforts of the Area Housing Authority to petition for increases in the payment standards to reflect local market conditions and promote the program through links on the city's website to the Area Housing Authority website. Program 9 is the city's inclusionary housing programs. The city reviews each residential development to ensure compliance with the guidelines. And then I've already mentioned some of the features of that program. So I'll move on to the next slide. Program 10 is adequate sites and requires the city to ensure adequate capacity of residentially zoned area in the city. In the housing element sites inventory to meet the city's REIN obligation. And of course, we demonstrate that in the housing element update, including via the land inventory information. Program 11 is design flexibility. And under this, the city utilizes the residential plan development process to provide flexibility from development standards as an incentive to encourage development of housing for lower income households, and periodically reviews the municipal code requirements to ensure that design standards do not impede affordable housing development. Program 12 is housing rehabilitation assistance, under which the city uses CDBG funds for its rehabilitation programs to assist income eligible households with needed maintenance and repairs. Okay, so new programs include Program 13, which is to seek grant funding to support affordable housing activities and apply for grant funding when available to support affordable housing activities such as owner-occupied housing rehabilitation, affordable housing and property acquisition, and down payment assistance. Program 14, the first-time homebuyer down payment assistance loans program, and is to provide down payment assistance to households that are selected to purchase an affordable unit through the city's CDBG funded affordable housing preservation program. And we want to point out here that the city has received a grant through the state's permanent local housing allocation grant program to support the citywide down payment assistance program for lower and moderate income households. Program 15, housing policies, requires the city to review each city council housing policy for internal consistency and for current affordable housing needs, and update if necessary. And the city has 5 existing city council policies that address affordable housing. And I believe those are specifically called out in your agenda report or staff report. So I'll list each one of those. Okay, and there is a new state mandated program that we will be including in the housing element update. And this is program 16, zoning ordinance amendments. And this relates to 3 new laws, AB 101, AB 139, and AB 2162. And these are all designed to facilitate shelter development and housing for persons with disabilities, and requires the city to complete the following zoning ordinance amendments to address the following recent changes to state law relating to low barrier navigation centers, emergency and transitional housing, and housing for persons with disabilities. And I'll cover those briefly on the next 3 slides, each one of those laws. The AB 101 relates to low barrier navigation centers. And under this law, cities must allow these centers by right in zones where multifamily and mixed uses are allowed. And low barrier navigation centers are serviced enriched shelters focused on moving people into permanent housing. AB 139 relates to emergency and transitional housing. And under this bill, cities must allow shelters to accommodate the homeless point in time count, which is and it's done on a county by the county or on a countywide basis, but covers individual jurisdictions. And under this bill, cities must calculate the required, well, first of all, cities must allow shelters to accommodate the homeless point in time count. And then cities must calculate the required parking based solely on the number of staff working at the facility and not on the number of beds provided. And lastly, AB 2162 relates to housing for persons with disabilities. And under this law, cities must allow supportive housing by right in zones where multifamily and mixed uses are allowed. So what are the next steps? After tonight's meeting, staff will bring the draft housing element to the Planning Commission, and that is anticipated to occur on May 4th, 2021. So just next month, for review and recommendation to the City Council, to make a review and recommendation to the City Council. And after that, bring the draft housing element to the City Council, and that is anticipated, currently anticipated to occur on May 26th for review, and to authorize staff to submit the housing element to HCD for review and comment. Lastly, staff recommendation tonight is to receive the update on the housing element, second public workshop, and the community survey results that we just told you about, and provide additional feedback on the draft goals, policies, and programs for inclusion in the draft 2021-2029 housing element update. So at this point, that's the end of the presentation. And if council or planning commission or anyone has any questions, they can direct them to me or to staff. So thank you for your time.
Do any of the council members or commissioners have questions? Mr. Kildee.
Yes, thank you. So could you kind of go over me a little bit of the dates here? I believe the current one is October 15th, I believe, this year. And it goes up to the state. And the question I have, are you, I suppose this is for Mr. Martin, are you confident that we've touched most, if not all, the bases?
Yes, I am, but we've touched the bases. Now, you know, and part of the presentation was saying that, for example, on fair housing, we do anticipate that we may need to add some analysis and data to the housing element. It's unfortunate that that guidance hasn't actually come out yet, but we do anticipate, based on things that have been going on in other parts of the state where maybe the jurisdictions are on a different housing element cycle. For example, down in the San Diego region, their housing elements are due to the state already, about right now, about like tomorrow.
Greg, let me add on to it. This is Veronica. I've been working on the housing element in the San Diego region and trying to work with HCD on a quote unquote like model or template analysis that would be acceptable to them before they issue the technical guidance. And they've been telling me that the technical guidance is 90% there, but they're not quite ready to release it. But because in the San Diego region, we're ahead of the SCAG region by at least 6 months. So I'm pushing the state to give a further guidance on that. Hopefully within the next couple of weeks, I would have a quote unquote model to follow. Then we can supplement the analysis for Camarillo. But at this time, there is no official guidance as to the compliance required, like what constitute a compliance to them.
Right. And that may require more analysis and incorporating that into the housing element, but of course we don't want to just guess what they might want and put that work in. We want to put the work in and be efficient about it and effective once we know what we really need to do.
Mr. Kildee, did you have any other questions?
That's all I have. Thank you.
Mr. Talmadge.
Yes, thank you. I would ask first if there's any members of the Planning Commission that have a question or comment. I know that Commissioner Murphy has an item that he would like to present and discuss. So I would turn it over to Commissioner Murphy first, and then any other Planning Commission members, please ask your questions.
All right, thank you, Chair Talmadge, for that. I have reviewed the housing element, and I would like to suggest the addition of a program that has to do with sheltering our homeless. So Camarillo residents are well aware that within our community live dozens of people who are homeless. We see them, we think about them pretty much every time we get in our car or every time we walk within our city limits. And I believe that most of us wish the best for them. On cold, rainy nights, we shudder to think of where they may be at that moment or how they are going to make it through the night. We have programs in town. Many churches, nonprofits, philanthropic organizations that do their best to provide our homeless food, blankets, and various other needs. And the city certainly is helpful in that regard as well, especially and in particular, the city, the police department. But we don't yet provide them actual shelter in this town outside the COVID era. The National Alliance to End Homelessness, a large, well-supported organization that has been around since 1983, has conducted innumerable studies over the past many decades on measures that are and are not effective in addressing homelessness. In those studies, the concept of housing first has emerged as the most effective way to get homeless back on their feet and on their own. The idea is to get a roof over their head, then offer assistance not necessarily required for the personal issues that landed the person on the street in the first place, rather than vice versa. In other words, roof first, services to follow. One study after another, including several rather ambitious ones conducted by the Homelessness Research Institute, which is an arm of the National Alliance to End Homelessness, show that most people, 71% to over 90%, successfully adjust and find their own stable housing within a year of enrolling in a Housing First type program. In today's Star, there was an article about the United Way Symposium and its focus on Joe Biden's recently passed $1.9 trillion spending package that includes $50 billion of housing and homelessness assistance. Representative Julia Brownlee was there, and she was quoted as saying, "It's a good first start when we're thinking about housing, including equality and poverty." When Camarillo applies for this funding, it could be very helpful to have an actual initiative that produces a plan to address short-term and long-term shelter for our homeless. So looking at our housing element update, I took a stab at the wording for an additional program for the element, which sequentially at this point, I believe, would be program 17. It's short and sweet. It is, again, it's just a stab, and I've never put together something like this before, so I would be looking to see where we would go from here with this, if it's something that we would consider. So program 17, housing or homeless housing initiative. Develop strategic plan for providing emergency and transitional housing to accommodate the homeless community in Camarillo based on the city point in time count. Again, just a stab at this, the responsible agency would be the City of Camarillo, Community Development Department. Time frame would be within 1 year of element adoption. Funding source, knowing if none other, would be the general fund. And the program objective would be to establish a plan for prioritizing, resourcing, locating, designing, and building emergency and transitional housing for the homeless community in Camarillo. With that, thank you so much for listening, and I will offer it up for questions that anyone might have.
How would that differ from slide number 33 under 2021, 2029 draft programs, emergency transitional housing in response to AB 139?
So this is Greg Martin again. Would you like me to pull back up that was program 16? Maybe we talk about the zoning ordinance amendments that encourage or to address AB 139.
Well, that was 16, but also it would be 2 slides later that I'm talking about.
I can pull the presentation back up and share my screen again. If you like.
Yes, Mayor Craven, while he's doing that, what the difference is that the state law states that the city must allow through the zoning, the policing power. And I believe what Commissioner Murphy is stating is that the city will actively pursue the design and construction of the shelters themselves.
Thank you for that clarification. It's to pursue a plan. It's to establish an initiative where we investigate the implementation of those items. The final goal would hopefully be to actually establish physical shelters, but for purposes of the housing element, it's just to put the plan together.
Oh, that's my understanding, and I think we can clarify further if necessary, but the draft language is for a program to develop a strategic plan. And I think we still need to answer Mayor Craven's question, because I do think that could also potentially be dovetailed with program 16 as it relates to our requirements to comply with state law under Assembly Bill 139 for emergency and transitional housing. So, Mr. Martin?
Yes.
So if you can expound upon what the anticipation is for compliance with AB 139 for emergency and transitional housing, I'd appreciate it.
Okay. Well, other than, I think the very basic requirements are the cities must allow shelters and to accommodate the homeless point in time count. But I think, as you're saying, allowing them in your zoning ordinance and actively pursuing their, planning for and pursuing their construction are different things. So this program 16 is really just to make the necessary revisions to the zoning ordinance to comply with state law to just allow these shelters. But it then also has this parking requirement that's a sort of a technicality, but it could be an important one because parking requirements can be a significant constraint when developing any development, but including shelters. And also Veronica Tam might be able to further address that question. I'll ask her if she would like to do that.
Well, yeah, sorry. Can you repeat the question? Because I heard that about the zoning issue within the shelter. The essential thing is that you're only required to do shelter zoning and properly zone that you can facilitate the development, but actual development of a shelter is something that's entirely depending on whether nonprofits have the funding to do that. It's not part of the actual housing element implementation in terms of developing a shelter. Essentially, the law is there, but currently the direction is housing first, is actually not emergency shelters from the federal and state level in terms of a policy direction. What the state and federal is looking for is really to immediately rehouse people before they turn into a long-term kind of homeless situation. So the law requires you to provide the facility, the zoning for it, but the actual funding policy directions is through rapid rehousing and permanent supportive housing. If that kind of, answers some of your concerns.
Okay, Mr. Tremblay.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Mr. Martin and Ms. Tam, I still don't understand the requirements of AB 139. So if you could go to slide 33.
Okay.
What slide? Let me get my question out, okay? What slide 33 says in the first bullet is that cities must allow shelters to accommodate the homeless point in time count. That's not what I'm hearing you say AB 139 requires. So my first question is, does AB 139 require municipalities to build shelters?
No.
Okay. My second question.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, I have several questions.
The requirements for zoning for emergency shelters came back in 2007 under SB2, which requires local jurisdictions to identify at least one zone that can accommodate at least one shelter, but with the capacity to accommodate your unsheltered homeless population up to that. But that's entirely from a zoning perspective. Do you have a zone that would potentially allow the construction of emergency shelters? But the requirement is not for you to build a shelter, only that you have a zone that allow for shelters to be constructed by rights without discretionary review. That's 2007 SB2.
So for example, would the city council then be required under that to, let's just use an example. Let's say you have pick an industrial zone. The city would have to pick one of the existing zones in order to accommodate, in order to include, if I'm understanding it correctly, the ability to accommodate a shelter, right? So you have to pick
Right.
one of the existing zones.
Right. And which you have done already. You've totally met that requirement already. You have
That's
met
right.
the SB2 requirement already. And because that's 2007 requirement. You've met that requirement already. What AB 139 is doing is amending that requirement by stating that, well, you cannot set your parking requirement based on the number of beds. Because a lot of the homeless people don't have cars. What they want you to set the parking requirements for the shelters is that you need to set it based on the staffing level of the shelter, should you have a shelter. So that's AB 139 is amending that, just the parking requirement portion of that law of SB2. So you've done that already.
Okay, so
Except for the parking requirement that you need to go back to fix. The other part about the homeless count is, in the past jurisdictions, there's a homeless count that's done usually by the continuum of care that says we have how many homeless in the city or in each city. Some cities would try to kind of shy away from that and say, no, we think, well, no, homeless is only 2 people. But there is nothing in state law to say that, well, you need to kind of follow a standard. And if the homeless point in time count is the source of how you get your homeless funding for the continuum of care, then you need to use that point in time count as your official count. So this AB 139 kind of officiate the point in time count, so that jurisdictions cannot come back and walk back and then, well, no, it's not really 100. I think we have only 2. Before 139, there's no way that the state can tell like one way or the other. 139 says you need to use your point in time count. So that's the only thing. But essentially, the only thing that you need to change regarding the zoning for emergency shelters has to do with just the parking standard. So can we now go to 101? 101 is low barrier navigation center, which is a totally different kind of use. It's not an emergency shelter. It's basically for people who, yes, they were formerly homeless, but they're working towards some kind of programs. They're participating in some kind of programs that are getting them ready to be transitioned to permanent supportive housing or permanent housing. So only in that kind of situation would the low barrier navigation center is a different types of housing. They're not emergency shelters for people who come in and out and stay for 7 days or a day or overnight. It's really for people who are participating in programs that are getting them ready to move into permanent, be it education, job training, and some other type of kind of like life, like independent living type of skills that would allow them to go back into permanent housing. So that's not emergency shelters.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Tam. I don't have any other questions at this time. I've got some comments for later. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Any other questions? Mr.
Yes.
Talmadge.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation as well. I want to be clear what we're really talking about here. We're talking about just the update to the policies and programs and feedback that was received from the public meeting and public comments. We're not really talking about the whole rest of the housing element. And specifically what I'm getting at, housing elements often have numerous graphic representations that show current zoning. It updates from the previous housing plan, what happened, what was good, what was not good. And provides a basis of here's where we go from here. And one of the items that I think is particularly important is the site inventory of where future housing could be consistent with zoning and other requirements of the city. Because we're reaching a point, and I know in reading a lot of the comments, probably a third of the people said, oh, there's too many houses, don't build anymore. Well, we can't really do that either. However, I think if there's a clear graphic representation of what opportunities are there based on existing zoning in the general plan and where housing opportunities exist, I think is beneficial. Now, are we going to see that in the housing element that we're going to be reviewing in May next month? Or is all we're going to see what you just presented now? Because I think there's more to the housing element than just the policies and goals.
Yes, that was provided as a preliminary land inventory previously to both the Planning Commission and City Council. And that definitely will be included in the draft housing element.
Okay.
For review and consideration on May 4th.
Right. Another specific question was, we had some discussion about the Senate Bill 330, and where it held in abeyance the city's requirement for 400 development allotments, and that particular legislation sunsets on 1/1/2025. As a practical matter, what happens between now and 1/1/2025? Is it wide open, or is the city still going to be following its 400 units per year for allocations? How is that going to work?
So the city still has its local police power under general health, safety, and welfare.
Right.
To review and approve permits for residential construction. We did have to suspend the procedures that we had in place through our development control ordinance, chapter 20 of the municipal code.
Right.
Which was the allotment process to make sure that we weren't outpacing infrastructure with growth. Now, while that's suspended, we do see that most of our development projects are either adjacent to existing built infrastructure within our community, or it's infill development. So the good news is over the next 4 years, because we're already a year into that program, that we don't anticipate having a project leapfrog existing infrastructure and creating a problem for the community as it relates to infrastructure and making sure that growth keeps pace with our existing capacity. So we do have to suspend the development control ordinance based on state law, and we've done that, but we don't foresee there being any significant challenges or issues coming forward with the city as it relates to that suspension.
Well, it's a very common occurrence that you drive around town and all of a sudden you see a project going up and people say, where'd that come from? When did that get approved? Well, the answer is it was approved 8 years ago, and they just are getting their allotments, and they finally have enough allotments to get the funding for their particular project and to get started. So I'm a little concerned about that interim period of what's going to happen. We've had some recent approval of some significant numbers of units that, of course, in any 1 year far exceed the 400 units. And I guess I'm concerned about that. I think it's an excellent measure the city has to look at infrastructure and can it support a particular project. But I'm wondering about the next 3 years or 3+ years of how that's really going to pan out. Are we going to get a rush to the land office to build houses, or what? So that's my concern, and I don't have an answer, but I want to raise it as a concern that I do have. So there's also a requirement at the end, when the housing element is all done, there's either a statement, comment, discussion about overall impact of the housing element on other supported utilities like water, sewer, and other type things like that. Is that going to be part of what we'll see when we get the final plan?
Yes, there is a section of that housing element that deals with infrastructure, potential constraints, and generally, I can tell you that we've not identified any utility infrastructure constraints
Okay.
that would prevent the potential development of the number of units and then the sites identified in the housing element land inventory.
Well, the concern I have, as we all know, we're right in the front end of a significant drought. And when you go back and look at urban water management plans, what do we do in extended dry year periods? What sort of conservation measures, what sort of restrictions get put in? I hate to use the word moratorium, but that is one of the words that comes up in that discussion, simply on water availability. And I guess I would like to see some discussion that addresses that question of what do we do in extremely dry years, pulling from the urban water management plan and other documents that are required by the city. So I don't know how you plan to address that, but I think it's something that ought to be there, because it's right in front of us and it's big time, it's real, it's there.
Yeah.
And I think one thing we want to emphasize though is this housing element is not proposing to change your zoning or general plan when it comes down to housing development. Like whether the site is included in the housing element or not, it's currently permitted to be built based on your general plan. So we're not introducing growth that is above and beyond what is already analyzed and assumed in your current general plan.
Well, I guess my response to that is, I think I would like to see in the document at least a consistency comment between what is proposed in the housing element vis-a-vis the general plan and other specific plans that may relate to potential future development of housing. So, because I think it's a matter we cannot ignore.
Thank you for the comments, Chairman Talmadge.
I would ask if any other members of the Planning Commission have any comments.
I have a question. I can't see everybody's screen.
Go ahead.
Thank
Go
you.
ahead.
I'd like to go back to Commissioner Murphy's program 17, which sounds to me like it is like an extension, a second step to program 16. If it's not applicable in this zoning plan or in this housing plan, is there another area or another place that it could be applicable or be placed? To me, it sounds like it's just something that we would need to follow through on program 16.
So I would like Veronica or Greg to weigh in if I'm off track here, but I understood that all of the programs that we presented this evening that were included in the agenda report are consistent with what we have done in the past in our existing housing element and are also intended to comply with updates in state law. And so I think if we were to proceed with that path that was anticipated by staff, we would be compliant with presenting a housing element document to our state housing community development for their review that would potentially be certified. Now, to add programs, the city can add programs. They can add 1, 2, 10, however many they feel is appropriate. It's based on policy direction ultimately of the city council and potential budgeting for those programs. And keep in mind that we could also have policies that are implemented by the city council that don't necessarily have to be in the housing element. So I think that upon, and I don't want to speak for Commissioner Murphy, but upon reading the agenda report and reviewing the draft document programs, that he felt that this may be an appropriate additional program for the city council to consider at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Espinosa.
Yes, I think if I understand, program 16, it doesn't seem to me to relate to what Mr. Murphy was proposing. It seems to me to just be a zoning ordinance incorporation of law applicable to those areas related to the emergency
Right.
shelter and so forth. It sounds like what Commissioner Murphy, maybe I'm wrong, but he might have been proposing that there be a more defined role as to the city's pursuing needs assessment or something to be proactive in terms of shelter needs. And I don't know that that's there. I don't know if it exists, but it seems to be one step further and maybe not related to program 16.
Mr. Vaca, let me ask, because this one has a time limit and a funding source. Do any of these other programs have a time limit and a funding source if they're abbreviated?
Yes, they all have timing and funding sources, and it's in the agenda report. It's specified under each program, the responsible agency. For instance, under the Housing Rehabilitation Assistance Program number 12, it's on big page 10 of the agenda report, indicates that the responsible agency is the City of Camarillo Community Development Department. It indicates that the time frame will be ongoing, which means it's continuous. And the funding source is anticipated to continue to be community development block grant funding. And then it outlines really what the objective is. So that's consistent for every program. And I believe the majority, if not all, are mostly handled by the City of Camarillo Community Development Department.
Would this program, proposed program 17, be eligible for CDBG funding?
Most likely it would, because I would think that the strategic plan associated with the provision of housing for extremely low income individuals would qualify.
Do any other council members or commissioners have questions? Ms. Santangelo.
Just following up on that, for the funding source for each program, if it's delineated in this, does that mean that can be the only funding source?
No, I believe that there's some that indicate general fund, but over time, for instance, if the city determined that they wanted to earmark community development block grant funding on a program that had historically or had already been implemented with general fund, I think that'd be entirely acceptable.
Okay. No more questions, just comments when the time comes.
Anybody else have any questions? I saw Mr. Espinosa first and then Mr. Murphy.
Yeah, I wanted to ask the community comments that were in the presentation. One had to do with the inclusion of housing policies as an appendix attached to the housing element. And I don't think that was embraced, but I wanted to find out, is there a downside to that in doing that?
No, we're internally reviewing the policies to determine the best way to provide those as a public-facing document, and whether or not that should be on our website or under our housing website. So we're currently reviewing that.
Because I thought it was a good idea, because I mean, honestly, it is difficult to track down at times, especially if you have to know the policy number and so forth. And if it was part of the housing element, it may be easier to locate in that manner.
Yes. Yeah, thank you for that. We are continuously looking into that as part of this process.
Mr. Murphy.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to clarify that the concern is for program 17, or a clarification on that is it doesn't have to go, it doesn't have to be program 17. And as Commissioner Espinosa alluded to, and Commissioner Vandermeulen, it could go somewhere else in our housing element. The concern I have is that we move forward with an 8-year plan with nothing more than zoning ordinances pertaining to our homeless community. And that seems like a long time to not even establish an initiative or a plan to address those needs. In terms of funding, as new state and federal program monies become available, and I mentioned the Joe Biden spending package that includes $50 billion in housing and homelessness assistance. I imagine that when the city applies for these funds, they get rated in terms of their need and their program and how committed they are to pursuing this particular item. So having that in our housing element, I think would be helpful in those applications.
Mr. Edsel.
I just wondered, in the process where we're at now, would there be, it seems like we're late in the process. Would there be time to add a program 17, seeing that we're set to vote on this on May 4th? Is it too late, or is it still time to do that? I guess is this the appropriate place to put it, or is there some other area like Ms. Vandermeulen suggested within the city where this thing could be addressed, but not necessarily in the housing element?
So I don't believe it's too late. And what's going to happen next is that the draft housing element will be prepared. Then it will be presented to the Planning Commission on May 4th. And then we'll accept again any public input or testimony, and then fine tune it and present it to the City Council in draft format, anticipated on May 26th. And then ultimately we send it right after that to Housing and Community Development through the state, and they have a 60-day review timeframe, and they'll most likely take 60 plus whatever days extra they want to get it back to us. After that, we will update and fine tune the housing element further with additional refinements typically coming out of HCD, and then go through public hearings, including CEQA analysis, back through Planning Commission in August is what's anticipated, and then City Council in September for an eventual adoption prior to the October 15th deadline. Okay. So we are within the anticipated schedule that staff set forth with this program of getting the housing element updated in a timely fashion. We do think that ultimately, if push comes to shove, there might be a little bit of wiggle room with the state on that deadline. And most likely that's typically attributed to them taking longer than anticipated for review. But that is what we have slated for the schedule of getting this work completed. And the main response to address your question is it's not necessarily too late. It's not to say that we wouldn't necessarily have to update a program later in this process. We've already discussed that we're waiting on technical advisory memo from HCD, which will specify how we have to implement program 16. Mm-hmm. That could require refinements to that program as well.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Madam Mayor, I've got a totally, I'm sorry, Madam Mayor. Yes, I have a totally different issue that I want to talk about, but my thought is from a process standpoint, you might want to wrap up conversations relative to this particular issue, right?
Right. I think we need to take these one at a time. And I do want to note that we have a 7 o'clock advertised public hearing, but what are we going to do with this item?
May I offer some comments, Madam Mayor?
Sure.
So I want to thank Commissioner Murphy for bringing this forward, and I know it comes from a good intent. And at the last council meeting, you remember that I had asked staff to provide an update to the council on current efforts, on county's current efforts on homelessness front. And we did not have a point in time count in 2020 because of COVID. The last point in time count that we had was in 2019, and I'm anticipating we're going to have a point in time count coming up here soon. My understanding from Commissioner Murphy is that he's just asking for a plan and that it be incorporated into the element to do it from a plan standpoint. My concern, I'm conceptually okay with having something maybe included in program 16 or 17. I don't really care about that too much. But I do have some concerns as follows. First, whatever is provided in our element to HCD is something that we're going to have to stand by. So I'm concerned about corralling the city in. And when I look at the language that Commissioner Murphy provided, I have some difficulties with the language. And it's coming from a good intent, but for example, on the time frame, I understand that the idea is to have a plan within 1 year, but it may take longer than that. And I don't want to lock the city into that. I would rather see it be ongoing rather than 1 year. The funding source, I don't believe we should lock into the general fund, particularly now coming out of COVID and wanting to make sure where we're going forward from a budget standpoint. I would rather have it say, general fund or other available sources. And then finally, on the program objective, what the draft language says is to establish a plan for prioritizing resources, locating, designing, and building emergency and transitional housing for the homeless community in Camarillo. I don't think we should be locking ourselves into a design and a build solution. I think there are other solutions that might occur that don't include designing and building a new homeless shelter. So I would prefer that we say, to establish a plan for prioritizing, resourcing, and locating emergency and transitional housing, and leave off the designing and building aspects. So with that language, with those language changes, I could be supportive of putting something in either as program 17 or on to 16. I don't really care which one it's in, and frankly I defer to our expert consultants on that and to Mr. Vaca as to what would present better to HCD. So thanks for the chat. And by the way, Madam Mayor, just I have a totally different issue that may take some time on this, and I want to bring it up at a later time.
Okay, so let me put it to Mr. Murphy first. How do you feel about that?
Thank you. I appreciate those comments. As I said, when I drafted this, it was very much off the cuff, and I think that I like the ongoing. So the time frame, I believe, Councilmember Tremblay was suggesting that we change that verbiage to on an ongoing basis, and that's in tune with what I think I was talking about before. Is within this 8-year period, we would be active. The city would be active in pursuing and in generating ideas and developing a plan. So I like that. The general fund or other available sources, absolutely. The prioritizing, resourcing, and locating. So the designing and building is, there's two types of shelters. There's the temporary, and then there's the transitional housing. And the temporary could conceivably, take place in one of our many vacant buildings in the city. There wouldn't be a lot of designing and building involved, but there still would be some. So I would hope that that we could include something to the effect that the city would be looking at affecting their existence. And I'm not saying that very well. That being said, if I would be willing to strike designing and building if that's something that everyone would feel comfortable with moving forward on.
So are you, let me just ask, because there are 3 people ahead of me in line, but let me ask, by designing and building, you're suggesting the city pay the full cost of designing and building the shelters? Because usually the person, the company, the developer, the nonprofit that is going to pay for the construction also is involved in the design.
Yes, thank you, Mayor Craven. It's not to actually design and build or bring into existence. That's not included. That's not what I'm asking be included in our housing element. It's to establish a plan for doing that.
I like your wording at the top to say accommodate better than design and build as part of it. But next up is Susan, and then Tony, and then Beverly.
I'm already unmuted. Mr. Murphy, thank you. I really appreciate you bringing this to our attention. And I think this is the absolute place that it should be. And I also agree with you, and I was so pleased to hear you talk about the evidence out there that housing first is the way to approach homelessness. Our point in time count in 2019 was over 30. I know we didn't have a count this year, but I'm sure it's higher than 30. I know one person who experiences homelessness and refuses to go to a shelter because he does not want to leave Camarillo. I know of homeless people in Camarillo who have refused to go to a shelter in other cities because they don't want to leave Camarillo. And frankly, it's kind of unfair that we have to utilize other cities' shelters for the homeless that live in our city. So I don't see the housing situation getting better. So I think it makes so much sense for us to be looking at this at this point. I think Mr. Trembley's edits were good. I also think we don't want to be shoehorned into the design and build because, like you said, Mr. Murphy, there are buildings that can be repurposed. I think this might be a lot closer than some of us might be thinking. There's actually some funding already available from the state that could make this a lot more possible than we think at this point. So that's all I'm going to say about that. But I support this. I don't care if it's incorporated into another element just to be throw off that, or if it's another program itself.
Mr. Tremblay, and then then Beverly.
No, I'll pass for the moment. Thank you, Madam.
Okay. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. I was just wondering if we could use some wording in there, like partner with an organization or someone to bring this to fruition if we needed some way that we were partnering with somebody to finish any projects to be done, or rather than just leave it unfinished. And I just want to say, I did hear last week from one of our residents here in Leisure Village that rides a fixed route bus quite frequently everywhere because she doesn't drive, and was telling me about one homeless lady that gets on along the way and how her circumstances are that I don't think she wants to go into a homeless shelter somewhere, but yet she's living out there and she rides the bus. And she was just saying how difficult it is for the other bus riders when this homeless lady gets on when she's hasn't bathed and she's carrying all of her trash and stuff with her, that we really do need to, to look for somewhere to house these people and, keep them in Camarillo where they want to be. So, like I say, whether it's in this housing element or somewhere else, to put it in our policies or projects, I would like to see it somewhere to be worked on sooner rather than later. Thank you.
So we've got 10 of us here. Do we want to instruct them to go ahead and add it to one of these? And if so, how do we want to word it? Mr. Mulchay.
From a wording standpoint, I'm generally comfortable with the amendments that were offered up by Mr. Tremblay. And that timeframe ongoing, funding source, amending other available sourcing. I do agree in striking designing and building. I like the just prioritizing resourcing and locating. In that I think the most effective and efficient way of realizing this is probably going to be working with a whole host of different organizations and or partners. I don't think the city is necessarily the best one to go do it alone. But obviously homelessness is a significant issue. It's one that's growing, and we need to find some more innovative ways in trying to deal with it. So I do agree in trying to do something, but I'm fine with that wording. I think that's appropriate.
Mr. Kildee.
Yeah, I'll be brief. I really support Mr. Murphy bringing this up. I personally think homelessness is one of the biggest issues that this country and our state are facing, with very limited solutions to this. I think it's going to be here for a long, long time. I do agree not to buttonhole the city. I like the word accommodating. Give us some flexibility about how we're going to deal with this in the future. There may even be some new ideas that we're not even aware of. So that's those are my suggestions.
Okay, so we have two bodies here. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Talmadge and have him bring the find out how the Planning Commission would like to recommend, and then we'll ask the City Council to vote.
Mayor Craven, at some point, you should probably check if any of the members of the public want to speak.
You're right, and I didn't do that, and I apologize. We have 8 members of the public. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the joint bodies on this matter? I see no hands. If so, please raise your hand now. I'm gathering there are no members of the public. I see no hands raised. So Mr. Talmadge, I apologize for getting out of whack there.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. I would ask the Planning Commission, I think we have heard discussion on the item, and it seems that we're focused on some amendment to whether it's a new policy number 17 or add to 16, unclear to me, but I would leave that to staff. But I would ask if the Planning Commission, if you are in approval with adding this element into the housing element. And I think if we could do a very quick vote of it's an interesting thing. This isn't a binding vote. It's more just a consensus of how we all feel. Do we all feel that this proposal, as amended, proposal from Mr. Murphy, that it should go forward? Is there a concurrence of the Planning Commission to do so? I'll just do a quick roll call. Mr. Murphy?
Yes, I'm in concurrence with it moving forward.
Mr. Edsel?
No, I don't think I am.
All right. Mr. Espinoza?
Yes, I am in support.
Ms. Vandermeulen?
Yes, I support it going forward.
And as chair, I support it as well. So we have a 4-1 vote of the Planning Commission to move this one particular item forward. And I think not to amend that, but simply to say, first off, we appreciate being included in this joint meeting. And second, the presentation from our consultants on this part of the housing element. And we look forward very much to seeing the item again in a few weeks. And perhaps we'll have more comments at that time. And then moving on to our recommendations to the city council. But for this particular item, I think we're in favor of moving forward with it. Does that answer your question, Madam Mayor?
It sure does. So now let's take the city council. Is there anyone who objects to moving this forward as the planning commission has? Now's the time to
Mayor?
raise your hand.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
Yeah, I don't object to it, but I want to make it clear that my support is based on the amendments that I've offered.
Right, and we'll talk about this in more detail next time.
I think I heard the planning commission say they were supportive of the amendments.
Yes.
But anyway, I just want to make it clear for the record that that's where I'm coming from.
I believe I heard them say that too. City council members are all okay with it? As amended by Mr. Tremblay? Okay, so I think staff has gotten direction on that. Now, Mr. Tremblay, you have another issue.
I do, and Madam Mayor, I think this one's probably going to take at least 10 or 15 minutes. So I know that it's 7:04. Might I inquire of the chair how you want to do this? Because I know you've got a public hearing set for 7.
Let me ask the city manager or the city clerk or the city attorney how we should proceed. Should we pause this discussion and start with public comments and then on non-agenda or agenda items and then have the public hearing, or continue this item and then have those later?
Well, you could complete the item that you're on, and then you should go to your 7 o'clock agenda.
Okay, let's go ahead, Mr. Tremblay.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So pivoting to a completely different issue on the housing element. The ultimate question that I'm going to ask Mr. Vaca and Mr. Moe and our consultants will be whether or not this issue ought to be addressed in the housing element update. There is a real elephant in the room that is not been discussed, and it's pending legislation known as SB 9. And many of you may be familiar with SB 9, but I think it's important that we talk about it in this context. We can't have a discussion on the housing element, in my view, without talking about it. So let me just sort of set the stage. And I apologize for those of you who are already familiar with it, but there may be a few who may not be familiar with it. That pending legislation is directly relevant to this discussion because in many ways, in my view, it would render the updated housing element road that we're about to go on down and the RENA numbers obsolete. SB 9 has its first policy committee hearing tomorrow, April 15, in the Senate Housing Committee. And as of today, as of 4 o'clock this afternoon, the Senate Daily File and the legislature's website showed that the bill is still set for hearing tomorrow morning. What does SB 9 do? If it's adopted in its present form and approved and signed by the governor, where you have one single family home now standing in a single family residential lot, it would require this city to approve with no discretion, no public hearing, no CEQA review, 2 things. 1, a housing development of no more than 2 units, a duplex in a single family zone. And number 2, the subdivision of a parcel zoned for residential use into 2 approximately equal parcels. So how does it work? I mean, it's called upzoning. The bottom line is one could split, an existing single family residential lot owner could split their lot into two lots and then build a duplex on each of the 2 lots. That gets you to 4 units in a single family residential zone. And on a lot that would otherwise have 1 home on it, you'd now have 4. But that's not all. That's not the whole story. Because of recent ADU legislation that all of us, and I would say on the Planning Commission as well as the council, have struggled with this last year, one could add 2 ADU units, 2 accessory dwelling units, so that there are now 6 units. And it would be a mix of homes and duplexes and ADUs right now where there's 1 home. And it doesn't stop there, because there is an analysis of this bill that suggests that you could have up to 8 units on 1 lot that currently has a single family home. My personal view is that if this bill in its current form is adopted and signed by the governor, it destroys local control. It absolutely fundamentally destroys it and fundamentally changes the residential character of a city. So let's imagine one day you might wake up in your single family residence and in your single family residential neighborhood in which you've invested the better part of your life and your savings, and find 6 to 8 high density housing units right next door to you in what was formerly a single family residential zone, with no discretionary call by the council, no public review, no CEQA review. To me, that just sticks a dagger in single family residential zoning, and it sticks a dagger in cities' ability to exercise discretion over housing. The bill is championed by a San Francisco legislator and a San Diego legislator. And the San Francisco legislator carried very similar legislation last year in 2020, which almost passed. In my view, it's San Francisco politics being rammed down the throats of the city of Camarillo and every other municipality in this state. Can't be more clear. And there are folks who back it. Ventura County YIMBY backs it. There are other housing organizations that back it. And I've advocated, and you've heard me say it in this forum, I've advocated and I believe in affordable housing. And more housing is needed statewide. But this is, and I'll use a bankruptcy court term, this is a cram down. In the bankruptcy context, it's a cram down and a top down approach for housing. The city, we've already taken a position in opposition to this legislation, and that's noted in the bill analysis that I pulled right off the legislature's website today, as well as the bill itself. The concern that I have, and why I think that, aside from what I think are terrible public policy implications, but the concern for the housing element in particular, and here's the question I want to pose to city staff, is this. First of all, it's fundamentally at odds with our policy number 1 in the housing element, not program number 1, policy number 1. And number 2, the League of Cities has already filed an opposition letter where the league says, among other things, and I quote, they are asking for many amendments, including that to ensure that HCD provides regional house needs arena credit for the production of SB 9 units. So let's say we get into a situation where a year from now, SB 9 passes the legislature, the governor approves it. What does that do to our arena numbers? And let's further assume that 18 months down the line, you have several, I'll make it 2 years down the line. You literally have dozens and dozens, if not hundreds of new units coming in to being built within the city with no discretionary review by the council, no CEQA review, no nothing. And that has all kinds of problems entailed with it, including parking and everything else. But what do we do with respect to our housing element? The city, the League of Cities has said, hey, if we're going to have arena numbers, you ought to have credit for whatever SB9 units there are. So I guess my question to Mr. Vaca and Mr. Moe and to the consultants is, do we want to have something addressing this issue in the housing element update so that we have, as a city, the ability to pivot and address this legislation, and recognizing that it's only pending legislation, but it comes on the heels of last year's bill, which was just very narrowly, it didn't make it out because it didn't get into the original House of Origin and before midnight. So do we address this in the housing element? And as a matter of public policy, I would hope that the public, I don't think many members of the public even understand or have been informed, let me put it that way, have been informed that this legislation is real and it may be moving forward, and it's really significant public policy. So question to Mr. Vaca, do we address this in our housing element so that we can take a position that is consistent with the league's position? Because I think we have what, 1,300 and it's either 1,357 or 1,352 RENA units for our next cycle.
Yes, we have 1373.
Okay, thank you. There's a different figure, but it was close.
Very close.
Would you recommend that we address this issue in the housing element?
I think we need to continue to monitor this very closely, and staff shares the position with the council on the comment letter that was sent to the state that we do not support the bill as prepared or drafted at this time because it usurps the city's local control authority. However, because it's not law at this moment, I don't know that we would necessarily address a bill that's pending.
Madam Mayor?
Yes.
But playing devil's advocate, Mr. Vaca, why would we not, as a matter of policy, if we're setting forth our policy in the housing element updates, why would we not want to take a policy position that to the extent that legislation of this type is enacted, it should be counted. The units that are produced out of this should be counted against the city's RENA numbers, because otherwise the RENA process is rendered obsolete.
No,
by what's going to happen here.
We would want to obtain credit for that, and I believe that we already have proposed that we would count accessory dwelling units towards compliance with achieving our RENA numbers. Mr. Martin, I believe that that's what we anticipate doing with any future accessory dwelling units in our draft housing element at this time. And I believe that if there were accessory dwelling units that were constructed in the future as part of this Senate bill, assuming it gets passed through the legislature, that we would want to obtain credit for that for satisfaction of RENA.
Yes, that's correct, Mr. Baca.
And yeah, I would add that also in your annual progress reports, general plan annual progress reports, if those units are constructed, that would be reflected there too. But also even with our current housing element, we have identified adequate sites to meet the RENA for cycle 6, which is the 2021-2029 upcoming housing element period. So then, basically you can count those sites as having been built as you go along in your annual progress reports, and then also update your estimate of how many ADUs you think will get built, depending on what bill actually gets passed, if it gets passed, and how the actual construction goes.
Mr. Tremblay.
Madam Mayor, so what I'm hearing then, the response is that the city would not be precluded from remarking on this in its annual updates to HCD, notwithstanding that we don't have something in this current 2021-2029 update. Am I understanding that correctly?
That's correct. That's our understanding also. So in our annual report to HCD on the number of units constructed towards achieving RENA, we do include ADUs currently, and we would continue that practice. Keep in mind that we don't need to physically build units. We just need to have the appropriate zoning to accommodate those units.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Okay, are there any other issues separate from the two we've discussed to be brought up before the Planning Commission and then the City Council takes up the suggested action? The suggested action is to receive the update. We did that. look at the community survey results, provide additional feedback. We've done that. And I say we need, and so is there a motion? Well, I'll turn it over to Mr. Talmadge. I'm sorry. You need to receive it, and then I don't know if it asks us to take any action.
No, I did not see that there was action. It was for us to listen to the presentation, provide comments, which we have. There was one suggestion about the potential of a new element as outlined by Commissioner Murphy, and then as amended through our discussion. Specifically, comments from Councilman Tremblay. So I think our recommendation is, yes, we received and we provided comments, and we recommend that the consultant incorporate the proposed, I don't know if it's a policy program as outlined and amended by Commissioner Murphy.
Okay, and then would you like to, well, let me do the same for the city. We have received the update, we've provided feedback, and it will be coming back to both agencies later. So at this point, would you like to close the Planning Commission meeting, or do you want to continue and listen to all the rest of it tonight?
No, I would ask if the Planning Commission, if there's any other comments or closing comments that you all may have. Commissioner Vandermeulen.
Thank you. I just want to put in also some support for Councilmember Tremblay's view on SB 9. I did get to listen to some of the senators and aides and stuff from the Bay Area yesterday, in which the senator from San Francisco was there when we were talking about SB 9. And I got a really good look at his not wanting to change anything on it. So we had just to know that CAI, or the Community Association Institute, is also in force opposing that bill, but they're opposing it mainly to try and pull the CID properties out of it, common interest developments out of it. But they gave a lot of talk on what it would do to the infrastructure, bearing the age of a lot of the properties that it would be going into. So it was really interesting listening to that from both the Bay Area Council chapter and then our local chapter of that group. So it's not a good bill.
I don't think Senator Atkins wants to pull any residential areas out of this bill, SB 9.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Commissioner Vandermeulen. Any other comments from the Planning Commission? With that, I will adjourn the Planning Commission. We stand adjourned.
Okay, and the City Council meeting will continue. City Council meeting will continue. And the first thing we will take up is public comments. These are comments particularly on items that are not on the agenda, since the only other item tonight is a public hearing. Is there any member of the public who would like to speak to us on an item that is not on the agenda? I see no hands raised. No. So we will go on to the public hearing. Item A, ordinance amending and restating Camarillo Municipal Code, Chapter 19.12, Rural Exclusive Zone. Could we have a staff report, please?
Yes, thank you very much, Mayor Craven and members of the City Council. I will be providing a verbal update on the agenda report that was prepared for the City Council in the packet and to the public. So it's important that everyone knows that what we're doing is considering an amendment to our municipal code, Chapter 19.12, the Rural Exclusive Zone, ultimately to include the word residential within the title, to better identify the existing rural exclusive zone as the Rural Exclusive Residential Zone. And this is based primarily because this is a residential zone and the title doesn't recognize that. This anticipated zoning ordinance amendment that's before you this evening is exempt from CEQA under the general rule exemption, that only projects that have potential for causing significant effect on the environment are subject to CEQA. And this item only involves textual clarifications in the ordinance, mainly restating existing law. So the rural exclusive zone, as defined in our existing chapter 1912, is intended to promote and preserve large lot subdivisions which are capable of producing and supporting certain ancillary agricultural uses and keeping of certain domestic animals for personal purposes. So the city of Camarillo has always considered the RE zone to be primarily residential in nature. And this has always been depicted on the city's zoning map and our city's general plan land use map. Back in January on the 14th of this 2021 year, the Ventura County Board of Supervisors adopted the industrial hemp cultivation ordinance, and that established a ½ mile buffer around areas identified by Ventura County Agricultural Commissioner as sensitive areas. Although the definition for sensitive site includes all residentially zoned areas, the county did not recognize our city's rural exclusive zone as a residential zone. They instead considered our RE zone as non-residential. So unfortunately, based on that, the ½ mile buffer would not be applicable to the city of Camarillo's residentially zoned properties in the rural exclusive zone. On January 22nd, the city's Economic Development and Land Use Policy Committee discussed this matter, and they did recommend that staff work on bringing an item forward to the council for consideration to include an initiation of a zoning ordinance text amendment to add the word residential in the name of the zone, thereby verifying that it would be the rural exclusive residential zone. And ultimately, this then would satisfy the definition as a sensitive site as described in Ventura County's industrial hemp cultivation ordinance. Following the committee meeting, staff presented this item to the city council on February 10th. And the city council then initiated the zoning ordinance text amendment to add the word residential in the title of the rural exclusive zone. And again, this is intended to make sure that these properties that are already zoned for residential purposes would then qualify as sensitive sites to have the ½ mile buffer. On March 16th, the city's planning commission reviewed the proposed ordinance and held a public hearing. And they voted unanimously in favor, recommending that the city council also adopt the proposed ordinance that's been prepared for your consideration this evening. So the attached ordinance that was provided in the packet, also provided in red line, it does demonstrate the rural exclusive zone with the inclusion of the word residential in the title. So it would be the rural exclusive residential zone. And it also includes non-substantive changes and clarifications to chapter 19.12. We further updated the red line version that was provided for the city council as a red folder item under section 19.12.040 property development and performance standards to change it so that the way it reads is going to be the development standards set forth in sections 19.12.050 and through 19.12.160 apply to all developments within the RE zone, and no building or structure may be erected which does not provide these standards. So that's an update that was made and submitted via red folder that would be incorporated into the ordinance if that is the city council's desire to adopt the ordinance with that inclusion. Staff has been continuously monitoring and researching the locations of industrial hemp cultivation areas within the county that have already been permitted by the Ventura County Agricultural Commission. And there have not been any permits to date within the incorporated boundary of the city of Camarillo. And to our knowledge, there have not been any permits issued within 1/2 mile of the incorporated city boundary of Camarillo. Staff recommends that the city council would request a reading of the title of the ordinance and waive further reading and introduce an ordinance that would amend and restate Camarillo Municipal Code, Chapter 19.12, Rural Exclusive Zone as the Rural Exclusive Residential Zone as proposed. That concludes my overview of the agenda report.
Are there any questions? Mr. Kildee?
Yeah, Mr. Vaca, with this potential change, excuse me, would it have any impact on what the county ordinance? Will it impact that at all?
It would allow the county to then finally make a determination that properties in the city of Camarillo that are in the rural exclusive residential zone would qualify as sensitive areas. And therefore, it would preclude any new permits being issued within a half a mile if this ordinance is adopted this evening.
So it would amend the county's ordinance then?
No, it would amend our ordinance so that the county could interpret our ordinance that it's residential and therefore a sensitive area. So they would then have to have a half a mile buffer from any property within the city of Camarillo in the rural exclusive residential zone.
And could that be retroactive to what they've done, or is this future?
It's future. So once the ordinance is in effect, any new permits that are issued in the county would have to then consider the sensitive areas under the rural exclusive residential zone.
Thank you. That's all.
Any other questions? If we pass this, then what do we do? Write to the county and inform them that we did this and ask them to amend their map?
We will pass this hopefully and then update the county and let them know that yes, these are all residentially zoned properties and that in the future, when they are considering any permits, that they should apply the half mile buffer.
Any other questions? Okay, this is a public hearing. It was advertised as a public hearing. I will open the public hearing. We have 5 attendees. I see no hands up. If there's any member of the public who'd like to speak to the city council on this issue, please raise your hand now. I see no hands raised, so I will close the public hearing and open it up for council discussion.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I'd request a reading of the title of the ordinance.
Okay, I'll ask the attorney to read the title of the ordinance.
Yes, this is ordinance number 1178. It's an ordinance of the City Council of the City of Camarillo, California, amending and restating Camarillo Municipal Code Chapter 19.12 R-E, Rural Exclusive Residential Zone.
Madam Mayor,
Yes.
I'd further move to waive further reading and introduce an ordinance amending and restating Camarillo Municipal Code Chapter 19.12 Rural Exclusive as proposed.
I'll second.
Okay, there's a motion and a second by Mr. Kildee. Could we have the roll call, please?
Councilmember Kildee,
Yes.
Councilmember Santangelo,
Yes.
Councilmember Tremblay,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Moshe,
Yes.
Mayor Craven.
Yes.
That motion carries unanimously.
And I just want to say that I live more than a half mile from the nearest industrial hemp farm that's been permitted. But in the early mornings when it's moist and foggy or just moist enough to be dripping, I go out to my driveway 5:30, 6 o'clock to pick up the newspaper, and that hemp smell is really strong. So half a mile might be good. We at that Board of Supervisors meeting had asked them for 1 mile and they really blew us off. What could we say? It's time now to go on to new business oral communications, informational items which do not require action. Mr. City Manager?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the council. Just one thing, and that is a reminder that we will be back in seat at our next council meeting. People will be required to wear masks and physically distance. We will be taking all the proper safety protocols and put those in place, but just that one reminder. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. City Attorney.
I have no items tonight.
Okay. Vice Mayor Moshe.
I will be brief. Meetings attended March 31st, Economic Development and Land Use Committee, April 5th, Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, and April 8th, the Airport Authority Committee meeting. That's all I got.
Ms. Santangelo.
I will not be brief, sorry. I'm going to talk about CPA tonight. So, but meetings attended April 1st, the CPA Board of Directors, April 5th, Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, April 8th, Airport Authority. And then on March 25th, I was honored to ask to help judge the California Lions Club Student Speaker Contest for District 4. I love that. I love hearing our youth, and the topic was distance and online learning, pros and cons. So it was very timely and helped me really have even more respect for what the kids are going through. And then on March 31st, I was on a panel for the Museum of Ventura County for the Changing Faces of Ventura County, Women Taking the Lead. And it was very, very cool to be on this panel of all city elected officials who were female. And it was just a really neat discussion about what drove us and what it was like and how to balance our lives. Okay, CPA. And the first thing I am going to say is that this stuff is really, really technical and really complex. And so while I may have a really good understanding of what's happening, my ability to explain it is not where I wish it could be. So I am going to give you kind of the rundown of what's happening and where we are, with the caveat. And I guess what I'd like to know from the council is, think about whether you'd like to have Ted come out and kind of do a presentation. Ted, the CEO of CPA, he's more than willing to do that because he can get a lot more technical and kind of into the weeds. So think about if that's something you would like. And I've written it out because I didn't want to mess things up. So if you remember, on December 9th, 2020, this council decided to change the default rate product from 36% lean to 50% clean energy. And this goes into effect October 1st, 2021. And our deliberation and discussion and our ultimate decision was based on certain power products and their power content, and based on certain rates for each product. And since then, things have changed. Essentially, CPA's energy costs are projected to increase significantly in the next budget year. And there's a number of reasons for this, and it's not just affecting CPA, it's affecting Edison as well. But there's reduced supply, our resource adequacy, and this is the biggest contributor to the increased cost. CPUC restricts imported energy, and there's just overall really tight conditions for the energy sources. There's an increased demand as we go into the summer and deal with summer heat, and especially the capacity during the evening hours. That's when everybody comes home from work and from school and everything gets turned on. And then, add on to that the electricity market and the industry is sort of turbulent right now, especially in light of what happened in Texas. So we're not in the most stable market. CPA's initial rates, and for the last 3 years, were really tied to Edison's rates. The thought was, how do we compare to Edison? We can provide the lean and the green power products for a little bit less than Edison. And then if you want 100% green, we'll ask our customers to pay a premium for that. But now we really, CPA needs to shift from making our rates somehow relate to Edison's to actually cover the cost. And Edison is really in that same position as well. Their rates have not adequately covered their costs. And we know this because they just raised their rates in February. They're going to raise rates again in June. And I won't be surprised if they raise rates again in the first quarter of 2022. So in analyzing our true costs and what we're forecasting, we have a shortfall. And so we need to make some changes. So these are the things we're doing. The first thing we did, we decided this at the last meeting, we made changes to our power product content. We shifted some of our purchases to hydroelectric, which is still greenhouse gas free, but it's not the ideal renewable green energy, but it does cost a lot less. So this saved about $15 million. CPA, when we purchase power, uses hedging, which means that you buy now and stock up on what you're going to get later. But that's an imperfect system and it doesn't cover all of the costs. We have programs like PowerShare and Power Response, which help control usage by using technology to give you feedback about your usage. There is a Senate bill, SB 612. It has to do with PCIA, which is the power charge indifference adjustment. And that is a whole other discussion. But if we're able to get SB 612 passed, that will help reduce costs. We are also always pursuing long-term power contracts with stable and competitive and predictable prices, but that's going to take longer time to be seen. So what we're doing immediately and what we have been working on for the last 2 months, and I'm on executive committee as well as the board. So every meeting has been looking at this really thoughtfully and really carefully. And it's going to include rate changes and it's going to include increasing the rates. And what we've been spending our time is looking at models that do this most effectively, that do it in a sustainable way and do it in a fair way and do it with being able to protect our most vulnerable. I do not know exactly what they are going to be. We have had, like I said, really long, thoughtful and really in-depth discussions about what's going to happen. But we should know in the next 1 to 2 months. But know that our rates will, at least at this point in time, be higher than what Edison is charging. We may find that in June, when Edison raises their rates, that then they are higher than us. We may kind of play this game where one's ahead of the other or not. But we really don't know exactly what that's going to look like. And we know that the supply challenges that we have are probably going to last anywhere from 1 to 5 years. Basically, what do we do about the fact? And I thought long and hard about this, and I had a conversation with Ted Bardicke, the CEO from CPA, and discuss the fact that when we made our decision to change our default, that we did that with a certain set of facts. We had a certain set of facts regarding what the power content was and what the rates were going to be. And that's what we used to make our decision. And so now we find ourselves in a place where all those foundational facts are changing. So it's not really fair. It's not fair to the community that we represent. It's just not fair. So we are able to get a deferral on our change of default level. We don't have to vote on it. Ted is allowed to do that. He has the authority to just defer our rate change for a year. And in the meantime, we had agreed to come back and discuss our default level. And so if we do that towards the end of this year, we'll have a lot more information about what the CPA rates have ended up being, what Edison has done. And so we will be able to reevaluate that. I think that's the way to go. I want, it's important to me that our community trusts in CPA and trusts in our transparency and, you know, being open about what's happening to the energy market. And it's also important to me that people remember that CPA isn't just about cheaper rates. You know, it's a not-for-profit community electricity provider. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but out of all the CCAs in the nation, we are the CCA with more customers on 100% green energy than anywhere in the nation. And when you think about that, when you think about what that does and what the effect on our climate is, that's pretty cool. The revenues that CPA makes are reinvested into our community. They're creating jobs and establishing programs. So I'm asking the community to kind of stick with us and understand, like I said before, that the energy market is being affected regardless of who's buying the energy. I will obviously, as soon as we have rate changes, bring those back to you. And I guess what I'm posing to the council is, do you feel that there needs to be an agenda item so that we can have discussion on this if you feel like that? Or do you want us to invite Ted for a presentation? So I'm leaving it up to your comments about the next step, if there needs to be one. And I think that's all I have. Thank you.
Do we want this as an agenda item with a presentation?
May I chime in?
Certainly.
I'd like to commend Ms. Santangelo. I thought you did a really great job of kind of explaining exactly what it is. If in fact we do want to invite, I'm sorry, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Ted, I'll refer to him as Ted. We may want to consider it, but I think we're a little premature right now. I'd like to wait a little bit to kind of see where we land with this. I don't think necessarily an agendized item at this point, but perhaps downstream a little bit. I don't quite know where that is, but I just think we need to kind of perhaps let the numbers kind of reflect a little bit so we have a little bit more of a compass on this. So those are my thoughts.
Mr. Tremblay.
Yeah, agree with Mr. Kildee. Susan, I thought that was an excellent report. It was just really well presented. And I think what I would like to see Ted Bardeke come back and address us, but my thought would be that we wait during the early summer, that we ought to have it in the third quarter of this calendar year. It seems to me might be a good time because it looks like we're going to end up deferring the October 1, 2021 increase anyway. And by the time we get into the third quarter, things will have, I don't think things ever settle down in the energy market, and we'll be in the summer. But that said, at least we'll have better information. And I think Ted Bardeke coming out to us is really helpful because it also is good from a transparency and a community education standpoint. So I would agree with what Kevin said. That's my input.
I see all the heads nodding, so I think staff's gotten direction on this. Mr. Tremblay.
Okay, and I wanted to add, Susan, thanks for serving on Clean Power Alliance because it ain't easy. It's a complicated subject. Meetings attended March 25th. We had the VCTC Finance Committee meeting with looking at the draft fiscal year 21-22 budget. March 26th, the Metrolink Board of Directors meeting. March 30, a Policy Committee meeting with Mrs. Craven. On April 2nd, a VCTC board meeting. And on April 9th, I had two committee meetings for Metrolink, the Executive Committee and the Contract Operations and Maintenance and Safety meeting. I also, on April 12th, attended the Water Resources Committee meeting for United Water Conservation District. And it was a very good and informative meeting. Couple of things on VCTC on April 2nd. Again, we conducted a public hearing on the fiscal year 21-22 draft budget. In the executive director's report, Mr. Kettle said that VCTC is going to be receiving about, we think somewhere in the realm of about $15 million through the ARPA, the federal ARPA legislation. And VCTC is responsible for distributing those dollars to urbanized areas, which include Camarillo. As of June 1, the mobile fare media for VCTC buses is going to be operational. And I think, like other transit operators, VCTC is going to be looking at when we start charging for fees again and looking at the entire fare box recovery issue. And doesn't that sound familiar to us? I mean, from a CamTrans standpoint, we're going to be looking at that as well. Also, from a VCTC standpoint, you may have seen already some of the Freeway Service Patrol trucks that are out there, and they started beat number 2, which is right in our area, on April 5, and that now it doesn't go from, it was originally going to go from Camarillo Springs to Central, but got extended earlier this month from Camarillo Springs Road out to Rice Avenue. So so we took on a couple of new freeway exits. So that's really good news that we've got the Freeway Service Patrol folks who are out there. On the Metrolink side, the Metrolink Board of Directors received a presentation and adopted a really, really well done climate action plan written by Metrolink staff. And I'm going to ask our staff, I'll send it to our staff and ask our staff to forward it to all the council members, because it's very well written. It's obviously aspirational, but it has targets, more realistic targets, and then what I think they call moonshots for the really, really aspirational targets. But it's extremely well written, and what I especially appreciate about it, it was written by a number of Metrolink staff, and they've dubbed themselves the Green Team. And the ability to bring together ideas and staff to work and to articulate some of these ideas is just excellent. So that has maybe some application for us too at the city in terms of where we go from a climate action standpoint. Metrolink continues to work on its recovery plan. You know that ridership for Metrolink has decreased. My goodness, somewhere between, take your pick on a particular point in time, but anywhere between 86% and 90% during the height of the pandemic. And is starting to slowly recover. But you get back into, and I think I reported to you at the last meeting that Metrolink is starting some new programs in terms of the weekend passes and the 5-day fare, et cetera. But like other transit operators, including us, it has a challenge. What do we do with respect to, because we've been in essence subsidized by federal CARES Act money and now by ARPA money for a while. Now, what are we going to do to get it back on course? So the Metrolink staff have been doing a very good job reporting to the board every month on what does that recovery plan look like. And then finally, unfortunately, we lost our CEO, Stephanie Wiggins, who has resigned to take the CEO position at LA Metro. She was formerly the deputy CEO at Metro. Now she, and then she went to Metrolink, and she's done a terrific job for Metrolink, but we've now lost her, unfortunately. And so the executive committee on which I sit, we're going to be in a recruitment mode here coming up shortly. Finally, I wanted to just bring to your attention, and I would ask staff to send it to you, aside from SB 9, which I really went off on tonight, there is another piece of legislation, SB 619, by Senator Laird. And you know that we've talked in the past about the about SB 1383 and the reductions for organic waste and so on. Well, if I'm understanding correctly, the requirements behind SB 1383 are so difficult to obtain and costly. SB 619 is proposing to extend those dates out. It's principally an LA delegation bill, and a lot of LA cities are wanting to say, hey, okay with SB 1383, but give us more time to comply with it. And it's something that all of us are going to have to take a look at, and we have been taking a look at, right? In terms of what we're doing with organic food waste. But it would delay the effective date of the new regulations, which were going to go into effect in January 1 of next year, 2022, to January 1 of an unspecified year. So that tells you how far they want to, they want to push it out. But I'll make sure, I'll ask staff to send you copies of SB 619 together with any relevant bill analysis so you are up to speed on it. And that's it for me, Madam Mayor. Thank you.
Mr. Kildee.
Yes. Okay, meetings attended, economic development, land use, transportation infrastructure, and we had a VRSD meeting, and it's not on the agenda tonight, but I've requested that Mr. Chris Tyson, who's our executive director for VRSD, come to the city council and make a report. That is pending. I don't want to get into a big discussion, but we got some really good news that our CUP for the land bill was extended, which is a really good news. We've been working for at least 2 years on the extension here. And Chris will be here, and we'll be able to ask him questions, and he'll give a report on our organization, where we are and where we're going, and all the interesting things that I think Councilmember Tremblay and all the rest of us have talked about, food waste and landfills and all the stuff that we've been reading about in the papers here. So look forward to that. We are, as most of us know, that there's a project going on Daily Drive that's curb and gutter and road replacement. And I just want to kind of shout out the company that's doing this. They went door to door to all the businesses around there and explained exactly what was going to happen with a very thorough timeline on that. And I have rarely seen a company do that. Very impressive of that. And it's really, really helped. And the city too, putting up the reader boards. We were all kind of driving around the city and looked at the reader boards up on the projects and what's going to, expect delays at a certain time. And I think that's been extremely important to the citizens here. So I think I'm always real proud of so many things that we do, but really letting as many people that use our infrastructure as possible exactly what's going to happen here, the timeline. There's not a lot of cities that I'm aware of that do that. And I think it's really, at least for me, it's very beneficial. I'll know if I have to make some changes in my route or my driving or my walking around the city. Also, if the rest of the council would agree to this, I'd like to adjourn in the memory of Ted Daniel. And Ted Daniel is probably about a 60-year resident here. And he was a volunteer in the city and a big supporter of what we do here. And Ted was a pilot. And back in the day, as many of us know, there was a whole lot of pilots that lived in Camarillo. They really liked Camarillo. So Ted was a pilot and volunteered his time and a real supporter of our city. So if we would, I'd really like to honor his life with adjourning in his memory. And that's all I have tonight.
Certainly, we can do that. My meetings attended, I attended the policy committee on the 30th of March with Mr. Tremblay. I attended the RDP 21 strategic committee on the 31st and its monthly meeting on the 1st. And this afternoon, I attended the California Contract Cities Legislative Committee. It was interesting. You might remember I was reporting on a bill last fall that I didn't think our city would be able to support, but I stayed on the committee because I wanted to know what they were developing and what they were doing, and it had to do with being required to join a housing trust fund. And the housing trust fund would decide where the low-income housing with your money would be built. I hadn't heard from the committee for about 3 months, so I wrote, I think it was last week, and asked, has this committee been meeting? Well, it turns out they had simply removed my name from the mail list. They told me, oh yes, I was certainly on it, but I wasn't on the distribution list. So today we had a meeting. I got a list of bills. I never did get the agenda, but the next meeting is 2 weeks from today at 3 o'clock. So we'll see if they're going to keep me on. But I do want to tell you, Susan, I appreciate your talking in language that I could understand, because I do not speak electricity. And I really realized that today when they were talking about SB 612, not having received the materials at about 2 o'clock and not having had a chance to go back and look at the bill and having them talk about the bill. They were up here and I was way down here in talking electricity. And they could have been talking any foreign language to me. So thank you for speaking in a language I could understand. I'm going to write up on some of these bills my concerns about them, and if the city isn't already tracking them and sending letters, or I guess we no longer send letters. I learned today that all comments for committees have to be sent in at least 1 week ahead, 1 week prior to the committee hearing, and all letters must go through the portal. So that was interesting to me, but there are several bills that I am really concerned about. I'll write it up and ask that it be distributed, just so I won't have to go through a long list of bills. But it wasn't just SB 9 Atkins. There are some others that I think are very onerous for municipalities. But I will tell you this, it was introduced as SB 809, the contract cities bill that they wanted to, that was developed last fall in that committee. And they had Senator Allen introduced it. They all met with Senator Wiener last week, and he and the league oppose it for several reasons, and they agreed to make it a 2-year bill. And oftentimes 2-year bills are never heard of again. So I don't know what'll happen. We can keep track of it. This will be the same legislature, so it will still be SB 809, and we can just kind of keep looking at what happens. So if there are no further comments, the council previously had recessed to a closed session. We did not complete the closed session. The city attorney has already given the reasons for going into the closed session, and at this time we will recess.
Madam Mayor, would
Yes.
you mind if we take like a 5-minute break or something before we go into closed session?
That's fine, but I want to recess this meeting first. And then we will meet, let's say, I see 8 o'clock, and how about if we meet again at 8:10 in closed session, but we will now recess to closed session.